The transport shuttle dropped through Prime's atmosphere with barely a shudder. Lieutenant Commander Jake watched his daughter press her face against the viewport, her eyes wide as the alien city sprawled below them. Sophie was 8 years old and had never left Earth until 3 months ago. Now she was about to set foot on one of the most important military installations in the galaxy. "Dad, look at those towers," Sophie whispered. "They're huge." Jake smiled despite the knot in his stomach. The towers of the Galactic Confederation Military Academy stretched toward the purple sky like massive spears. Each one housed cadets from different species, all training to become peacekeepers and officers. It was an honor that Earth had been invited to send observers. It was also terrifying. The shuttle landed with a soft thump. Jake gathered their bags while Sophie clutched the carrier that held Dallas. The honey badger made a low, grumbling sound from inside the reinforced container. "It's okay, boy," Sophie murmured. "We're almost there." Jake had fought the bureaucracy for weeks to get Dallas approved as Sophie's emotional support animal. The Confederation officials barely understood the concept. Most species either had no companion animals or considered them primitive. But Sophie's anxiety disorder was well documented, and Dallas had been with her since she was 5. Where Sophie went, Dallas went. The Academy's landing coordinator was a tall reptilian creature named. He stood nearly 7 feet tall with green-gold scales and eyes that looked like polished amber. He belonged to a species called the, known throughout the Confederation for their military discipline and rigid traditions. "You are the human delegation," said. It was not a question. His voice sounded like gravel scraping metal. "Yes, sir, Lieutenant Commander Jake and my daughter Sophie. We're honored to be here." His eyes flicked to Sophie, then to the carrier. "What is that?" "My daughter's support animal. All the paperwork was filed and approved." "I saw the paperwork. I did not approve it, but my superiors overruled my objections." Turned and began walking without waiting to see if they followed. "Your species is very soft. You coddle your young and make them weak." Jake bit back his first response. He had been warned that they were difficult. Earth needed this exchange program to succeed. Humanity had only joined the Confederation 5 years ago, and many species still viewed them as backwards primitives from a nothing world. "We have different approaches to training," Jake said carefully. "I'm looking forward to learning from your methods." Made a sound that might have been a laugh. "You will learn. Whether you can endure the lessons remains to be seen." The Academy grounds were massive. Cadets of various species moved in formation across training fields. Jake recognized a few of them. The tall, graceful beings with blue skin were. The stocky, furred creatures were. There were species he had never seen before, all moving with military precision. They passed a training yard where a group of young were practicing hand-to-hand combat. An instructor watched from the side, holding a long rod that crackled with blue energy. When one cadet moved too slowly, the instructor jabbed the rod into the student's ribs. The cadet collapsed, twitching. Sophie gasped. Jake put his hand on her shoulder. "Shock rods," said, noticing their reaction. "Standard discipline tools. They cause pain but no permanent damage. They teach cadets to avoid mistakes." "We don't use those on Earth," Sophie said quietly. Stopped walking and looked down at her. "No, you use soft words and gentle corrections, and that is why humanity has no warriors worth the name." Jake felt his jaw tighten. Earth's military had proven itself in 3 border conflicts since joining the Confederation. Human tactics had surprised everyone with their creativity and effectiveness, but he kept his mouth shut. Starting an argument on the first day would help no one. Their quarters were in the guest housing section, separate from the main cadet towers. The rooms were clean but basic. Metal walls, simple bunks, a small bathroom. Sophie set Dallas's carrier down and opened it. The honey badger waddled out, sniffing the air suspiciously. Dallas was not a large animal, maybe 30 pounds of compact muscle covered in dark fur with white stripes running down his back. His small eyes scanned the room with what looked like permanent irritation. Honey badgers always looked annoyed, Jake thought. It matched their personalities. "Home sweet home," Jake said, trying to sound cheerful. Sophie sat on her bunk, and Dallas immediately climbed up next to her. She buried her fingers in his fur, and the animal made a soft chirping sound. It was the most gentle sound Jake had ever heard Dallas make. The next morning, they attended their first observation session. The humans sat in a viewing area above one of the training halls. Below them, 50 cadets stood at attention while instructors walked between the rows, inspecting them. The lead instructor was. He moved slowly, examining each cadet with those cold amber eyes. When he found a uniform that was not perfect or a posture that was not exact, he used his shock rod. The crack of energy was followed by cadets dropping to their knees, gasping in pain. "This is normal," Sophie whispered to her father. "Different cultures have different methods," Jake said, but the words felt hollow in his mouth. He had served in Earth's military for 15 years. He had trained hundreds of soldiers. He had never once needed to use pain to teach discipline. One cadet caught Jake's attention. He was smaller than the others, his scales a lighter shade of green. When approached him, the young's whole body tensed, found a scuff mark on the cadet's boot. The shock rod came up almost lazily and jabbed into the cadet's shoulder. The young went down hard. "Pathetic's voice boomed through the hall. "You shame your bloodline, Vex. 20 laps around the compound, now." The cadet named Vex struggled to his feet and ran for the exit. As he passed below the observation deck, he glanced up. His eyes met Sophie's for just a moment. Jake saw something in that look, not anger or hatred, just exhaustion. The training session lasted 3 hours. By the end, Jake had watched the shock rods used 47 times. He counted each one. That afternoon, Sophie was allowed to walk the academy grounds during free period. Jake accompanied her, along with Dallas on a leash. The honey badger did not like leashes, but Confederation regulations required it. Dallas expressed his displeasure by walking as slowly as possible and stopping to sniff every single thing they passed. They found a shaded area near one of the training fields and sat down. Sophie was quiet, which worried Jake. She usually talked constantly about everything she saw. "You okay, sweetheart?" "Why do they hurt them?" Sophie asked. "The cadets, I mean, they're just trying to learn." Jake sighed. "Some species believe that pain makes you stronger, that if you fear making mistakes, you'll be more careful." "That's dumb," Sophie said flatly. "You told me that mistakes are how people learn. You said being afraid to mess up just makes you freeze." "I did say that, and I believe it." Jake looked out at the training field. "But we're guests here. We have to respect their ways, even if we don't agree with them." A shadow fell across them. Jake looked up to see the young cadet from the morning. Vex stood a few feet away, his posture uncertain. "I apologize for interrupting," Vex said. His voice was softer than without that harsh edge. "I saw you watching this morning. You are the humans." "We are," Jake said carefully. "I'm Jake. This is my daughter, Sophie." Vex's eyes went to Dallas. The honey badger stared back with his usual look of mild aggression. "What is that creature?" "A honey badger," Sophie said. "His name is Dallas. He's from Earth." "He looks fierce." Sophie smiled. "He kind of is, but he's also really sweet when he knows you." Vex hesitated, then sat down a few feet away. Jake noticed him wince as he moved. The shock rod had left its mark. "Are all Earth animals this small?" Vex asked. "Dallas is medium-sized for his species," Jake said. "We have much larger animals, and much smaller ones too. Our animals are mostly domesticated for food. We have no companions like this." Sophie stroked Dallas's fur. "That's sad. Dallas is my best friend." Vex watched them for a moment. "Instructor says humans are weak because you feel too much, that you let emotions cloud your judgment." Jake felt a flash of anger but pushed it down. "Instructor is entitled to his opinion. We believe emotions make us stronger, not weaker. They give us something worth fighting for." "I do not understand." "A soldier who fights only from discipline will do his duty," Jake explained. "But a soldier who fights to protect the people he loves will do the impossible." Vex was quiet for a long moment. "I have never thought of it that way." They talked for another hour. Vex asked questions about Earth, about human training methods, about Dallas, and how honey badgers were used in human society. Sophie explained that Dallas was not a working animal but a friend who helped her feel safe when her anxiety got bad. "Your instructors allow you to show weakness?" Vex asked. "It's not weakness," Sophie said firmly. "My brain just works different. Dallas helps me be brave." When Vex finally left to return to his duties, he seemed different somehow. Lighter, Jake thought, as if some small burden had been lifted. "I like him," Sophie said. "He's nice." "He is," Jake agreed. "But Sophie, you need to be careful. Instructor already thinks humans are soft. If he sees you befriending Vex, it might cause problems. I don't care what Instructor thinks, Sophie said. Vex needed someone to be nice to him. Jake looked at his daughter and felt a surge of pride mixed with worry. Sophie had her mother's stubborn streak and her sense of right and wrong. It had gotten her in trouble before, but he could not fault her for showing kindness. That night, as Jake tucked Sophie into bed with Dallas curled up beside her, he thought about what lay ahead. 3 more weeks of the exchange program. 3 more weeks of watching teaching methods that made his skin crawl. 3 more weeks of biting his tongue and playing diplomat. 3 weeks passed in a blur of training observations and diplomatic dinners. Sophie attended youth observation sessions every morning while Jake met with academy officials and other species liaisons. The routine became familiar, almost comfortable. That should have been Jake's first warning. Dallas had settled into academy life with typical honey badger stubbornness. The animal care staff had provided a secure container for times when Sophie had to leave him behind during CERT exercises. The container was made of reinforced steel, rated to hold creatures twice Dallas's size and strength. The engineers assured Jake it was escape-proof. Jake had nodded and said nothing. He knew better than to make promises about what a honey badger could or could not do. Sophie's friendship with Vex had grown despite Jake's warnings. The young would find them during free periods, always careful to make sure Instructor was nowhere nearby. Vex asked endless questions about Earth and seemed fascinated by the concept of training without fear. Cadets who cannot endure the shock rod are removed from service, Vex explained one afternoon. They sat in their usual spot under the shade while Dallas dug a hole for no apparent reason. It is considered a mark of shame. Your family loses honor. That's a lot of pressure, Sophie said. Yes, my older brother failed out 2 years ago. He could not handle the pain anymore. My father has not spoken to him since. Jake felt a cold anger settle in his chest. He had seen military washouts on Earth. Some people were not cut out for service, and that was fine. They found other paths. The idea of disowning a child for it seemed cruel beyond measure. What about you? Jake asked. How are you holding up? Vex looked down at his hands. Some days are harder than others. Instructor seems to find fault with me more than the others. I think he knows I am close to breaking. You're not going to break, Sophie said with absolute certainty. You're stronger than he thinks. Vex managed a small smile. You have more faith in me than I have in myself, small human. On the morning of the 22nd day, Jake was summoned to an emergency diplomatic briefing. A border dispute had flared up between 2 Confederation members, and human mediators were being requested. Jake did not want to leave Sophie, but duty was duty. I'll be back in a few hours, he told Sophie. Stay with the observation group, follow all the rules, and if anything feels wrong, you come find me immediately. Understood? Understood, Sophie said. Dallas made a grumbling sound from his container as if echoing the agreement. The observation group that morning was larger than usual. Cadets from 6 different species had gathered for a joint tactical exercise. Sophie sat in the viewing area with children from other diplomatic families, all of them watching as instructors set up the training scenario below. Instructor stood at the center of it all, his shock rod held casually at his side. He moved between the assembled cadets, offering criticism and corrections. The shock rod flashed out 3 times in the first 10 minutes. The exercise was supposed to demonstrate tactical movement under fire. Cadets had to cross an open field while instructors used stun markers to simulate enemy weapons. It was the kind of drill Jake had run 100 times on Earth, though without the shock rods for mistakes. Sophie watched as Vex's group prepared for their turn. The young looked nervous, his scales darker than usual. When the exercise began, his group moved well at first. They used cover properly and communicated with hand signals. Then one cadet stumbled, breaking formation. Instructor's shock rod found that cadet immediately. The student went down hard. The rest of the group hesitated, unsure whether to help their fallen teammate or continue the exercise. Keep moving, roared. In real combat, you do not stop for the wounded. Vex glanced at his fallen, then pushed forward. Sophie could see the conflict on his face even from the viewing area. The group finished the exercise, but their timing was off. His displeasure was obvious in every line of his body. Pathetic, announced. You move like hatchlings, not soldiers. You hesitate, you doubt. This is why your generation is weaker than those who came before. The cadet stood at attention, enduring the verbal assault. Paced in front of them, his shock rod tapping against his leg. Then his amber eyes shifted upward to the viewing area, to the observers watching from above, to Sophie. Perhaps, said slowly, a demonstration is in order, a lesson in what true discipline looks like. Sophie felt her stomach drop. Something in his tone made her skin crawl. You pointed his shock rod at the viewing area, at Sophie. Human child, come down here. The other observers went silent. Sophie looked around, hoping he meant someone else, but his eyes were locked on her. Now, said, or do humans teach their young to disobey direct orders from superior officers? Sophie stood on shaking legs. Part of her wanted to run and find her father, but she had been raised to follow instructions from authority figures, and this was technically a military academy, was technically her superior in this context. She walked down the stairs to the training field. Dallas's container sat near the edge of the exercise area, about 20 meters away. Sophie wished desperately that her father was here. Come here, human, ordered. Sophie approached slowly. Up close, seemed even larger and more intimidating. His scales gleamed in the sunlight and his shock rod crackled with barely contained energy. During the exercise you spoke, said. Observers are required to maintain silence during training drills. This is a violation of protocol. Sophie's mind raced. She had whispered to the child next to her just a single word when one of the cadets had fallen. She had not thought anyone would notice. I'm sorry, Sophie said quietly. I didn't mean to break the rules. Apologies are meaningless without consequences, said. He raised his shock rod, the blue energy dancing along its length. Perhaps humans need to learn that actions have prices. 200 cadets watched in silence. Vex stood frozen in formation, his eyes wide. The other instructors made no move to intervene. This was training field, his authority. Sophie wanted to run. Every instinct screamed at her to get away. But her legs would not move. She stood rooted to the spot, watching the shock rod rise higher. In that moment, several things happened at once. The steel container 20 meters away made a sound like a gunshot. Metal screamed and bent. Something was forcing its way through the reinforced walls from the inside, tearing through steel that was rated to stop small arms fire. A dark shape exploded from the ruined container in a spray of bent metal and broken locks. It hit the ground running, moving with terrible purpose and speed. Dallas crossed 20 meters in under 3 seconds. The honey badger was a blur of dark fur and white stripes, moving faster than Sophie had ever seen him move. His small eyes were locked on one target. Instructor, the threat to his human. Turned at the sound of tearing metal. He had time to see Dallas coming. He did not have time to react. 30 pounds of enraged honey badger hit 7 feet of warrior with enough force to stagger the reptilian backward. Dallas's jaws closed around the shock rod, crushing it in a spray of sparks and broken circuitry. The weapon died with a wet pop of failing electronics. Tried to shake Dallas off, but the honey badger had locked on. His jaws worked deeper into the rod, destroying it completely, then released to snap its armored gloves. This protective gear was designed to stop blades and energy weapons. It was not designed to stop an Earth predator whose ancestors had hunted venomous snakes for fun. Get it off me, shouted, genuine fear creeping into his voice. Cadets scattered. The viewing area erupted in chaos as observers fled. Instructors rushed forward with weapons drawn. Dallas positioned himself between Sophie and everyone else, growling deep in his chest. It was a sound that promised violence to anyone who came closer. Stun it, someone shouted. 3 instructors fired their stun weapons. The blue energy washed over Dallas, enough voltage to drop in seconds. The honey badger shook his head, annoyed, and kept advancing. One instructor got too close. Dallas feinted at him, and the instructor stumbled backward so fast he fell. Sophie found her voice. Dallas, no, stop. But Dallas was beyond commands now. He was in full defense mode, seeing threats everywhere. The circle of instructors widened, none of them willing to get within range of those jaws. Alarm klaxons began wailing across the academy. Security forces were being summoned. Sophie knew that when they arrived, they would have weapons designed to kill, not just stun. They would shoot Dallas. Please stop, Sophie screamed. Dallas, please. Jake heard the alarms from 3 buildings away. His blood turned to ice. He sprinted from the diplomatic briefing without explanation, following the sound of chaos toward the training fields. What he found was madness. 200 cadets pressed against the walls of the training yard. A dozen instructors with weapons drawn, all focused on one small animal standing guard over Jake's daughter. An instructor on the ground, his shock rod destroyed, his armored gloves shredded. Jake shoved through the crowd. Other humans from Earth's delegation were arriving, drawn by the commotion. They formed up behind Jake without being asked, their military training kicking in automatically. "Nobody shoot," Jake ordered. He kept his voice calm and level despite the terror clawing at his chest. "Everyone lower your weapons, now." "That creature attacked a Confederation instructor," one of the officers said. "It must be destroyed." "If anyone fires, you'll start a diplomatic incident that will end Earth's membership," Jake said. "Lower your weapons." The standoff stretched, 7 minutes that felt like hours. Jake moved slowly towards Sophie and Dallas, calling the honey badger's name in English, using the words Dallas had known since he was a kid. "Good boy, Dallas, good boy, it's okay now, you protected her. Good job, you can rest now." Dallas's growling quieted slightly. His eyes remained locked on the armed instructors, but his body language shifted just a fraction, from attack mode to guarding mode. Jake reached Sophie and pulled her behind him. He kept talking to Dallas in that same calm voice, praising him and reassuring him. Slowly, degree by degree, the honey badger relaxed. Finally, Dallas allowed Jake to approach. The animal was breathing hard, his fur standing up in all directions. But his jaws were no longer open in threat. He was just a tired animal who had done what his instincts demanded. Jake scooped Dallas up, holding the honey badger against his chest. Sophie wrapped her arms around both of them, crying into her father's shoulder. Instructor climbed to his feet, his amber eyes blazing with fury. "That animal will be destroyed, and you will be expelled from this academy for bringing a dangerous predator into a Confederation facility." "We'll see," Jake said quietly. Within the hour, formal charges had been filed. The delegation demanded Dallas be euthanized immediately. Earth's diplomatic status hung by a thread, and the Galactic Confederation Council called an emergency session to address what they termed the human-animal incident. Jake held his daughter while she cried. Dallas sat between them, looking tired but unrepentant. The honey badger had done what came naturally. He had protected his human from a threat. That no actual harm had come to Sophie did not matter. Dallas had seen a weapon raised toward her and had responded the only way he knew how. "What's going to happen to Dallas?" Sophie asked through her tears. Jake wanted to promise that everything would be fine, that Dallas would be safe, but he had never lied to his daughter and he would not start now. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I promise you this, I will fight for him with everything I have." Sophie nodded against his chest. Outside their quarters, Jake could hear voices raised in anger, the demanding justice. Earth's diplomats trying to negotiate, and underneath it all, the ticking clock counting down to the tribunal that would decide Dallas's fate. Jake looked down at the honey badger. Dallas stared back with those small, fierce eyes. The Confederation Council chamber was built to impress and intimidate in equal measure. The ceiling stretched 50 feet overhead, covered in displays showing star systems under Confederation protection. 12 seats arranged in a semicircle faced the center floor where those being judged would stand. Each seat represented one of the founding species. Jake stood in the center with Sophie beside him. Dallas sat at Sophie's feet, contained by a clear energy field that allowed everyone to see him but prevented him from moving more than a few inches. The honey badger looked annoyed by the restriction but otherwise calm. Ambassador Lisa Hayes represented Earth's interests. She was a small woman in her 50s with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. Jake had worked with her before and knew that her gentle appearance hid a mind like a steel trap. She had spent 15 years building humanity's reputation in the Confederation. This trial could destroy all that work in a single day. The delegation sat opposite them. Their advocate was a massive reptilian named, even larger than. He wore formal robes that marked him as a high-ranking legal authority. His amber eyes gleamed with satisfaction as he prepared to argue his case. The lead arbiter was Elder Sarin, a member of the species. They were philosophical beings who valued wisdom and calm judgment. Sarin's fur had gone silver with age, and his large eyes held centuries of experience. He was known as fair but strict in his interpretations of Confederation law. "This tribunal will come to order," Saren's voice filled the chamber without him raising it. "We are here to determine responsibility and consequences for the incident at Prime Military Academy. Advocate, you may present the prosecution's case." Rose from his seat with the confidence of someone who believed victory was certain. "Thank you, Elder Saren. The facts of this case are simple and undeniable. A dangerous Earth animal attacked a decorated Confederation instructor, causing injury and terror among Academy personnel." He activated a holographic display. The footage from the training yard played out for everyone to see, Dallas tearing through the steel container, the honey badger racing across the field, the attack on, the standoff with armed instructors. "What you see here is proof of human recklessness," continued. "They brought a vicious predator into a facility housing the children of 12 species. They assured us this creature was contained. They were wrong. The container was breached through brute force, showing either gross negligence in security or deliberate sabotage." Several council members shifted in their seats. The footage was damning. Dallas looked terrifying in the recording, all teeth and fury. Instructor suffered lacerations and shock from his own weapon being destroyed in his hands. Security personnel were forced to retreat from a creature weighing less than 15 kilograms. This is unacceptable. The animal must be destroyed, and Earth's participation in the exchange program terminated immediately. Sat down looking pleased with himself. Jake felt Sophie's hand slip into his. He squeezed it gently, trying to offer reassurance he did not feel. "Ambassador Hayes," Elder Saren said, "you may present Earth's defense." Lisa Hayes stood and walked to the center of the chamber. She moved slowly, deliberately, letting the silence build. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm and measured. "Thank you, Elder Saren. The prosecution has shown you what happened. Now I will show you why it happened." She activated her own display. New footage appeared, this time from Sophie's personal recorder that she wore as part of the observation program. The angle showed everything from Sophie's perspective. The exercise, criticism of the cadets, and then pointing at Sophie, his command for her to come down to the training field. The chamber watched as the small human child walked down to face the massive instructor. They heard words about violations and consequences, and they saw, clear as day, the moment raised his shock rod toward an 8-year-old child. "Under Earth law," Lisa said quietly, "what instructor attempted is called assault with a weapon against a minor. It carries severe criminal penalties. Sophie is 8 years old. She is not a cadet. She is not subject to military discipline. She is a child under her father's care, present only as an observer in a diplomatic exchange program." She turned to face the council directly. Instructor had no authority to discipline her, no legal right to threaten her with a pain compliance weapon. What you saw in the prosecution's footage was not an unprovoked attack. It was a response to a perceived threat against a child. "The creature is an animal," interrupted. "It has no understanding of law or authority. It simply attacked." "You are correct," Lisa agreed. "Dallas is an animal. He acted on instinct when he saw someone he loves being threatened. That is not a fault. That is nature." She brought up new information on the display. Videos of honey badgers in the wild. Footage of them fighting off lions to protect their young. Clips of honey badgers escaping from enclosures by digging, climbing, and problem-solving. "Honey badgers are known on Earth as one of the most fearless animals in existence," Lisa explained. "They form strong bonds with those they live with. They defend those bonds against any threat, regardless of size or danger. When Dallas saw Instructor raise a weapon towards Sophie, his instincts took over. He did what millions of years of evolution programmed him to do. He protected his family." The counselor, a tall being with blue skin and kind eyes, leaned forward. "This is a compelling argument, Ambassador Hayes, but the prosecution claims the container was secure, that the animal should never have been able to escape." "An excellent point," Lisa said. She called forward a security engineer named Dex. The engineer looked uncomfortable as he approached the center floor. "Officer Dex," Lisa said, "you were responsible for approving the container for Dallas. Is that correct?" "Yes," Dex said quietly. "And what were the container's specifications?" "It was rated to hold animals up to 75 kilograms with standard strength parameters. Reinforced steel walls. Magnetic locks with backup systems. It met all safety requirements for passive containment. Passive containment, Lisa repeated. What does that mean? Dex shifted his weight. It means the container was designed for animals that would simply try to wait out their confinement or might push against the walls, not for animals that would actively work to escape using problem-solving skills. Lisa brought up more footage, this time of honey badgers in captivity on Earth, systematically dismantling locks, using tools, and finding weaknesses in their enclosures. Did you research Earth animals before approving the container? Lisa asked. Dex looked at the floor. I reviewed the basic physical statistics, mass, strength estimates, general behavior notes. I did not conduct a full behavioral analysis. So you did not know that honey badgers are capable of tool use, problem solving, and focused destruction when motivated? No, I did not know that. Lisa nodded. Thank you, Officer Dex. You may return to your seat. She turned back to the council. There was no sabotage, no malice, just a failure to understand what we were dealing with. Dallas did not escape through brute force alone. He identified the weakest points in the container, worked at them systematically, and tore his way free when he perceived his bonded human in danger. This shows intelligence and purpose, not random violence. That makes him more dangerous, not less, argued. Does it? Lisa asked. Or does it make him loyal? Because from where I stand, what Dallas did was no different from what any soldier in this chamber would do if they saw a comrade threatened. He assessed the situation, overcame obstacles, and neutralized a threat. The only difference is that he has 4 legs instead of 2. Elder Soren raised a hand for silence. Ambassador Hayes, you make an interesting case, but the fact remains that your animal injured a Confederation officer. How do you answer that charge? By asking the council to examine Instructor's injuries, Lisa said. Medical records show superficial lacerations and minor shock from his own weapon. Dallas had his jaws around his arm. If the honey badger wanted to cause serious harm, he could have. Their bite force is capable of crushing bone, but Dallas did not crush. He did not maim. He disabled the weapon and drove off the threat. That shows restraint, not bloodlust. She paused, letting that sink in. I would also like to call a witness. Sophie, please step forward. Sophie let go of her father's hand and walked to the center. She looked tiny in the massive chamber, but she stood straight and kept her voice steady. Sophie, Lisa said gently, tell the council what you were thinking when Instructor called you down to the training field. I was scared, Sophie said. I had been watching him use the shock rod on cadets all morning. I saw how much it hurt them. When he said I broke the rules, I thought he was going to use it on me too. Did you ask Dallas to attack Instructor? No, I didn't even think about Dallas. I was just scared and trying not to cry. What happened after Dallas stopped Instructor? He stood between me and everyone else. He wouldn't let anyone get close, but he didn't attack unless someone tried to come toward me. He was just protecting me. Lisa nodded. Thank you, Sophie. One more question. If the tribunal decides Dallas must be destroyed, how will that affect you? Sophie's eyes filled with tears, but her voice stayed firm. Dallas is my best friend. He helps me when I get too anxious to think straight. Without him, I don't know if I can function normally. He's part of my family. Thank you. You can return to your father. As Sophie walked back, Lisa brought up one final piece of evidence. I would like to call Lieutenant Vex of the cadets. A murmur went through the chamber, stood immediately. Objection. Cadets are not permitted to testify against their instructors. This violates military protocol. The counselor spoke up. We are not in courts, advocate. We are in a Confederation tribunal. All relevant testimony will be heard. Vex entered the chamber looking terrified. He stood at attention, his scales pale with stress. Lisa approached him carefully. Lieutenant Vex, you were present during the incident. What did you observe? Vex's voice shook. I saw Instructor call the human child down to the field. I saw him raise his shock rod toward her. I have seen that stance before. He was going to strike her. How can you be certain? Because I have felt that shock rod many times, Vex said. I know the stance Instructor takes before he delivers correction. It is unmistakable. Stood again. The Instructor was within his rights to maintain discipline. Was he? Lisa asked. Lieutenant Vex, is Sophie a cadet under military authority? No, she is a civilian child. Do Confederation protocols allow military personnel to use pain compliance weapons on civilian children from other species without parental consent. Vex hesitated. I do not know the specific regulations. Lisa pulled up the relevant law on the display. They do not. In fact, Confederation Charter Section 12, Article 9 clearly states that civilians, especially minors, cannot be subjected to military discipline without explicit approval from their legal guardians and their home government. Sophie's father was not present. Earth's government never approved shock rod use on human children. What Instructor attempted was illegal under Confederation law. The chamber erupted. Counselors spoke over each other, demanded time to review the statutes. Elder Saren called for order. This is a serious accusation, Ambassador Hayes, Saren said once quiet was restored. Are you claiming Instructor broke Confederation law? I am not claiming it, Lisa said calmly. I am stating it as fact. Instructor attempted to use an unauthorized weapon on a child from another species without legal authority. Dallas's response prevented what would have been a violation of the Confederation Charter. She let that statement hang in the air for a moment before continuing. The prosecution wants Dallas destroyed for protecting a child from an illegal act. I ask the council to consider what message that sends. That animals who defend the innocent should be killed. That humans should have allowed their child to be harmed rather than risk offending an instructor who was breaking the law. Jake watched Lisa work and felt a surge of gratitude. She had taken a case that seemed hopeless and turned it into an indictment of himself. This tribunal will recess for deliberation, Elder Saren announced. We will reconvene when a decision has been reached. The council members filed out. Jake, Sophie, and Lisa were escorted to a waiting room. Dallas's containment field was maintained, and the honey badger dozed inside it, unconcerned with the fate being decided around him. How did I do? Lisa asked Jake quietly. You were brilliant, Jake said, but will it be enough? I don't know, Lisa admitted. We just have to wait. The wait stretched for 3 hours. Sophie fell asleep against her father's shoulder. Dallas woke, yawned, and went back to sleep. Jake stared at the walls and tried not to think about what would happen if they lost. The council chamber felt different when they returned. The air was heavier somehow, charged with the weight of decisions made. Jake carried Sophie, who was still half asleep. Dallas walked beside them on his leash, looking more alert now that something was happening. The 12 counselors sat in their seats, their faces unreadable. Elder Saren waited until everyone was settled before he spoke. This tribunal has reviewed all evidence and testimony, Saren said. We have deliberated on matters of law, culture, and the fundamental principles of the Confederation. What began as a simple case has revealed deeper issues that require our attention. Jake felt Sophie grip his hand. He could see Lisa Hayes standing absolutely still, every muscle tense as she waited for the verdict. We will address each charge separately, Saren continued. First, the matter of the animal designated Dallas and whether he should be destroyed as a threat. The chamber went silent. Jake stopped breathing. We find that Dallas acted in defense of his bonded human under reasonable perception of threat. Analysis of the footage shows the animal responded to what it interpreted as danger to Sophie. Furthermore, medical examination of Instructor confirms that Dallas could have inflicted far more serious injuries, but did not. This suggests the animal was attempting to neutralize a threat, not to cause maximum harm. Saren paused, his large eyes sweeping the chamber. The honey badger showed no aggression toward any other being once the immediate threat was removed. Security personnel reported that Dallas maintained a defensive posture but did not attack unless approached. This is behavior consistent with protection, not predation. Therefore, this tribunal rules that Dallas will not be destroyed. However, new containment protocols will be established for all Earth animals brought to Confederation facilities. These protocols will be developed in consultation with human experts on each species' capabilities and behaviors. Jake felt tears sting his eyes. Sophie made a small sound of relief against his shoulder. Dallas, oblivious to having his life spared, sniffed at the floor looking for something interesting. Second, Saren said, the matter of Sophie and whether she violated observation protocols. We find that while Sophie did speak during a training exercise, this violation was minor and would typically result in a warning at most. The response from Instructor was disproportionate and exceeded his legal authority. Sophie is cleared of wrongdoing. stood Elder Sarin. This is outrageous. You are undermining military discipline based on the word of humans who have been part of this confederation for less than a decade. Sit down, advocate, Sarin said calmly. We are not finished. Sat, his scales darkening with anger. Third and most concerning is the matter of Instructor's conduct. During our deliberation, several disturbing facts came to light. Sarin activated a display. Documents appeared, dozens of them. These are formal complaints filed against Instructor over the past 4 years. They detail excessive use of shock rods, injuries to cadets beyond what is considered acceptable, and a pattern of singling out students he deemed weak for special punishment. The delegation shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The Academy Board has been conducting a quiet investigation into these allegations for 6 months, Sarin continued. They were attempting to handle the matter internally to avoid scandal. The incident with Dallas and Sophie forced this issue into the open where it belongs. He turned his gaze directly on Instructor, who sat in the visitors section. Instructor, you are found guilty of multiple violations of proper training protocols. You exceeded legal parameters for shock rod use on at least 40 documented occasions. You created a hostile training environment. And most seriously, you attempted to use a pain compliance weapon on a civilian child from another species without authority. His jaw worked, but no sound came out. You are hereby stripped of your position as Instructor. You will face criminal charges for abuse of authority. You are barred from teaching in any Confederation facility for life. The chamber erupted in noise. The delegation was on their feet shouting protests. Other counselors called for order. Elder Sarin simply waited, letting the chaos burn itself out. When quiet finally returned, Sarin spoke again. This tribunal recognizes that different species have different approaches to training and discipline. We do not seek to impose one culture's values on another. However, all Confederation members agreed to certain fundamental standards when they joined. Protection of the young across all species is one of those standards. So is the prohibition against unauthorized use of force against civilians. He looked at Lisa Hayes. Ambassador Hayes, your defense revealed systematic problems that extend beyond this single incident. For that, the Confederation owes Earth a debt of gratitude. Lisa bowed her head in acknowledgement. However, Sarin continued, and Jake's stomach dropped. There was always a however. This incident has also highlighted Earth's incomplete understanding of Confederation protocols and the challenges of integration. While Dallas is not to be destroyed, his presence did cause significant disruption. While Sophie violated no major rules, her father's absence during the incident raises questions about supervision of dependents in military facilities. Sarin looked at Jake directly. Lieutenant Commander, you are assigned as liaison officer. Your primary duty is to ensure smooth integration between human and Confederation personnel. Would you agree with that assessment? Yes, Elder Sarin, Jake said. Then you must acknowledge that leaving your 8-year-old daughter unsupervised during a military exercise showed poor judgment. Jake wanted to argue. He had been summoned to a mandatory briefing. But Sarin was right. He should have made arrangements for Sophie, should have ensured another human was present, should have done a dozen things differently. I acknowledge my error, Jake said. You will receive a formal reprimand in your file, Sarin said. However, given the circumstances and Instructor's illegal actions, we do not recommend termination of your position. It could have been worse, much worse. Jake accepted the judgment with a nod. Finally, Sarin said, this tribunal makes the following recommendations to the Confederation Council. First, a comprehensive review of training methods across all member academies. Second, establishment of clearer protocols regarding civilian observers in military facilities. Third, mandatory cultural training for all instructors who work with cadets from multiple species. The counselor spoke up. Elder Sarin, I would like to propose an additional recommendation. I move that Earth be invited to host a summit on training methodologies. Their perspective has proven valuable in identifying problems we had failed to address. Several counselors nodded in agreement. Even some who had been skeptical earlier seemed to recognize the merit in the idea. An excellent suggestion, Sarin said. We will put it to a full council vote. For now, this tribunal is concluded. The gavel came down with a sound like thunder. It was over. They had won. Not completely, not perfectly, but enough. Sophie burst into tears, burying her face in her father's shoulder. Lisa Hayes allowed herself a small smile. And Dallas, sensing that tension had left the room, wagged his tail and tried to dig through the floor of his containment field. The delegation left without speaking to anyone, looked furious, looked broken. Jake felt a moment of pity for the instructor before remembering the cadets he had hurt over the years. Some people should not be teachers. Lieutenant Vex approached hesitantly. He looked at Sophie and managed a small smile. "You won," Vex said. "Your animal is safe." "Dallas," Sophie said, wiping her eyes. "His name is Dallas." "Dallas is safe," Vex corrected. "I am glad." "What's going to happen to you?" Jake asked. "You against an instructor, will there be consequences?" Vex's scales paled slightly. "Perhaps. My family may be displeased. But I think it was the right thing to do. You taught me that, small Sophie, that sometimes doing what is right matters more than following what is expected." Over the next few days, the aftermath of the trial rippled through the academy. Instructor was formally arrested and removed from the facility. Several other instructors who had used similar methods were placed under investigation. The Academy Board issued a public apology and announced sweeping reforms. But the most unexpected development came from the cadets themselves. Lieutenant Vex had not been the only one suffering under successive discipline. Dozens of students came forward with stories of abuse, injuries, and a climate of fear that had permeated the training program for years. The investigation expanded beyond just. It revealed a culture within parts of the military that valued pain tolerance over actual competence. Young soldiers were being damaged, physically and mentally, in the name of tradition. Ambassador Hayes seized the opportunity. She worked with the delegation and several other species to propose comprehensive reforms, not just for the Academy on Prime, but for training facilities across the Confederation. The summit proposal passed the Council vote with overwhelming support. Earth would host a gathering of military educators from all 12 species in 6 months. The goal was to share methodologies, identify best practices, and establish minimum standards that protected cadets while still maintaining effective training. Jake found himself appointed as one of the human representatives. He would help organize the summit and present Earth's approach to military training. It was a massive responsibility and a huge honor. Sophie's role in all of this was not forgotten. Several news services across the Confederation ran stories about the 8-year-old human whose bond with an Earth animal had exposed systematic abuse. She became something of a celebrity, though she seemed more interested in playing with Dallas than in fame. 3 weeks after the trial, Lieutenant Vex made an announcement that shocked his entire family. He was requesting a transfer to Earth to study human military doctrine directly. It was unprecedented for it to leave there for training elsewhere. Vex's father disowned him for the decision, but Vex stood firm. He had seen a different way of building soldiers, one based on trust and competence rather than fear and pain. He wanted to learn more. Jake approved the transfer personally. Vex would attend the United States Military Academy at West Point for 1 year, then return to the Confederation with his knowledge. It was the kind of cultural exchange that could reshape relations. The day Vex left Prime, Sophie gave him a gift. It was a small book about Earth animals, with an entire chapter dedicated to honey badgers. "So you remember," Sophie said, "that sometimes the smallest and fiercest things can change everything." Vex held the book carefully, as if it were precious. "I will never forget, small Sophie. You and Dallas taught me that courage comes in all sizes." On their last night at the academy, Jake and Sophie sat outside their quarters watching the sunset. Dallas dug a hole nearby, working with focused determination to create a burrow that would last approximately 10 minutes before he abandoned it. "Dad," Sophie said, "are you still mad at me for making friends with Vex even though you said it might cause problems?" Jake laughed. "No, sweetheart, you were right and I was wrong. Sometimes causing the right kind of problems is exactly what the universe needs." "Dallas caused a lot of problems." "Dallas did what he was made to do. He protected his family." Jake watched the honey badger dig with single-minded purpose. "You know, people are going to remember him. Across 12 species on dozens of worlds, they're going to tell stories about the Earth animal that tore through steel to save a child." "That's silly," Sophie said. "He's just Dallas." "To you, yes. But to everyone else, he's proof that Earth brings something different to the Confederation. Not just technology or tactics, but a different understanding of what makes someone strong. Sophie was quiet for a moment. Do you think things will really change after the summit and everything? Some things will change, Jake said. Not everywhere, not all at once, but we planted seeds. You, me, Dallas, Vex, Ambassador Hayes, we showed people a different way. What grows from that, well, we'll have to wait and see. Dallas finished his hole, examined it critically, and promptly laid down in it with a satisfied grunt. Sophie laughed, and the sound carried across the training grounds where cadets from 6 species paused in their exercises to listen. Change was coming to the Confederation. Slow, difficult change that would take years to fully realize. But it was coming. And it started because a small girl loved her fierce little animal, and that animal loved her back enough to tear through steel to keep her safe. Sometimes, Jake thought, that was all it took. One moment of pure loyalty and courage to crack open systems that had gone wrong. One honey badger, one child, and one instructor who learned too late that there were forces in the universe that no amount of discipline and fear could control. 6 months had passed since the trial on Prime. The conference center in Geneva, Switzerland hummed with activity as delegates from 12 species prepared for the opening of the Confederation Training Methodology Summit. It was the first time such a gathering had been held on Earth, and humanity was determined to make it memorable. Jake stood in the main hall, watching technicians make final adjustments to translation systems. Each species would hear presentations in their own language, a technical feat that had required 3 months of programming. But if this summit was going to work, everyone needed to understand each other perfectly. Sophie wandered through the crowd with Dallas on his leash. The honey badger had become something of a celebrity. Delegates stopped to take images with him, marveling at the small animal that had caused such massive changes. Dallas tolerated the attention with his usual grumpy dignity, occasionally sniffing at alien footwear with deep suspicion. "Your creature is smaller than I expected," a delegate said to Sophie, the tall, blue-skinned being knelt down to get a better look at Dallas. The footage made him seem larger. "He gets bigger when he's mad," Sophie said seriously, "and when people try to hurt the ones he loves." They laughed a musical sound. "Wise words, young one. Size is often less important than heart." Lieutenant Vex arrived that afternoon, fresh from his year at West Point. The young had changed. His scales were brighter, his posture more confident. He wore a hybrid uniform that combined elements of military tradition with human design, a symbol of the bridge he was becoming between cultures. "Sophie," Vex called out when he spotted her, "and Dallas." Sophie ran to hug her friend. Dallas sniffed at Vex's boots, recognized the scent, and made a pleased chirping sound. The honey badger remembered. "How was Earth?" Jake asked, shaking Vex's hand. "Challenging, enlightening, difficult," Vex smiled. "Everything I needed it to be. The human instructors at West Point do not use shock rods or fear. Instead, they build leaders through trust, through pushing cadets to exceed what they believe possible. It was strange at first. I kept waiting for punishment that never came. And now I understand what you tried to tell me on Prime, that the strongest soldiers are not those who fear their commanders, but those who trust them. I am returning to teach this method. Many will resist, but some will listen." The summit began that evening with an opening ceremony in the main auditorium. Representatives from all 12 species sat together, some of them traditional rivals forced to share space in the name of education and progress. Ambassador Lisa Hayes gave the opening address. She spoke of the incident that had sparked this gathering, of a child and an animal and the chain of events that had revealed problems hiding in plain sight. "We are not here to judge each other's cultures," Lisa said. "We are here to learn from each other. Every species in this chamber has developed their own approach to creating warriors and peacekeepers. Some of these approaches have wisdom we can all benefit from. Others have flaws that have gone unexamined for too long." She paused, letting her words settle over the assembly. "Earth is the member of this confederation. We do not claim to have all the answers, but we offer a different perspective shaped by our unique history. We have fought wars among ourselves for thousands of years. We have tried every method of training soldiers imaginable, and we have learned, often through terrible mistakes, what works and what destroys." The first presentation came from They shared their peacekeeping training methods, which emphasized de-escalation, cultural understanding, and the use of minimal force. Their approach had resulted in the lowest casualty rates in the Confederation, both among their own forces and among civilian populations. The followed, presenting their philosophical framework for leadership development. They believed that warriors must be thinkers as well as fighters, capable of understanding the moral weight of their actions. Then came the presentation. Jake had been worried about this one. Would they defend their old methods, or would they acknowledge the need for change? The presenter was not who Jake expected. Instead of a senior military official, a young officer named took the stage. She was barely older than Vex, her scales marked with scars from years of shock rod training. "I am here to speak truth," began. "For generations, they have prided ourselves on producing the hardest soldiers in the Confederation. We believed that pain created strength, that fear created discipline. We were wrong." A murmur ran through the delegation. Some looked angry, others looked relieved, as if someone had finally said what they had been thinking for years. The investigation following Instructor, Arrest, revealed that our methods were causing permanent damage to 1 in 4 cadets. Physical injuries that would never fully heal. Psychological trauma that impaired decision-making under pressure. We were not making stronger soldiers. We were breaking young warriors before they ever reached the battlefield. Displayed data that showed military effectiveness had been declining for decades. Soldiers trained under the harshest methods performed well in simple, predictable situations. But when faced with complex tactical challenges requiring creativity and adaptation, they struggled. Fear had made them rigid. "The human approach offers an alternative," continued. "Not soft words and gentle treatment, but trust-based training that pushes individuals to their limits without breaking them. It is harder to implement than shock rods. It requires instructors to be more skilled, more patient. But the results speak for themselves." She showed comparative data. Human soldiers, trained through methods that emphasized competence over compliance, showed higher adaptability scores, better stress management, and stronger unit cohesion than soldiers from most other species. The presentation sparked immediate debate. Traditional officers challenged the data, arguing that their methods had worked for centuries. But younger and representatives from other species began asking questions. What if there was a better way? What if tradition was not the same as wisdom? Jake's presentation came on the second day. He focused on something specific, a human military concept called mission command. The idea was simple but revolutionary. Give soldiers clear objectives, but allow them freedom in how they achieved those goals. Trust them to make decisions, even if those decisions might lead to mistakes. "We believe that the best warriors are not those who follow orders without thinking," Jake explained. "They are those who understand why they are fighting and can adapt when circumstances change. Fear makes soldiers obedient, trust makes them effective." He shared examples from human military history. Battles won by junior officers who disobeyed direct orders because the situation on the ground had changed. Campaigns saved by enlisted soldiers who took initiative when their commanders fell. Victories achieved through creativity and courage, not just discipline. The presentations continued for 3 days. Each species shared their strengths and acknowledged their weaknesses. Slowly, patterns emerged. The most successful military forces combined high standards with genuine care for their people. They pushed hard but did not break. They demanded excellence but created environments where soldiers felt safe enough to take risks and learn from mistakes. On the 4th day, a working group was established to draft minimum training standards for the Confederation. These would not replace each species' unique methods, but would establish a baseline that protected cadets while maintaining military effectiveness. The standards included prohibitions on certain practices. No pain compliance weapons on cadets under the age of maturity for their species. No discipline methods that caused lasting physical damage. Mandatory psychological support for students showing signs of trauma. Clear channels for reporting abuse without fear of retaliation. The delegation initially resisted, but pressure came from an unexpected source. Their own junior officers, the ones who had suffered under the old system and survived to lead despite it rather than because of it. They spoke up, adding their voices to those calling for reform. Lieutenant Vex played a crucial role. As someone who had experienced both systems, he could speak with authority about the differences. He described the fear that had dominated his training on, the constant anxiety about making mistakes. Then he described West Point, where instructors pushed him harder than trainers ever had, but did so with the goal of building him up rather than breaking him down. "I failed many times at West Point," Vex told the assembly. "But each failure was treated as a lesson, not a reason for punishment. My instructors asked me what went wrong and how I would do better next time. They trusted me to learn, and because they trusted me, I did not want to disappoint them. That motivation, the desire to live up to trust, drove me harder than any shock rod ever could." The final day of the summit focused on implementation. How would these new standards be introduced? What support would be provided to help species transition? What would happen to instructors who refused to change? A compromise emerged. The new standards would be phased in over 5 years. Species could maintain their traditional methods as long as they could prove those methods did not cause lasting harm and did not violate the baseline protections for cadets. Instructors would receive training in alternative discipline methods. Those who could not or would not adapt would be removed from teaching positions. Earth offered to host training programs for instructors from any species who wanted to learn human methods. They made a similar offer, as did the. A network was forming, species helping each other improve. The summit concluded with a signing ceremony. All 12 species committed to the new minimum standards. It was historic, the kind of moment that would be remembered for generations. But for Jake, the most important moment came after the ceremony, during the informal reception. He stood with Sophie and Dallas, watching delegates mingle and discuss what they had learned. A senior officer approached. Her scales were deep emerald, marked with scars from decades of service. She looked at Dallas for a long moment. "I served under Instructor," she said quietly. 20 years ago, when I was a cadet, he was cruel even then. I reported him multiple times. My reports were ignored." "I'm sorry," Jake said. "Do not apologize. You did what I could not. You brought his actions into the light." She knelt down, bringing herself to Sophie's eye level. "Young human, your animal did more than protect you. He started a revolution. There are thousands of cadets across the Confederation who will never be hurt the way I was hurt, because Dallas refused to let someone harm you." Sophie looked at the officer's scars, understanding what they meant. "Did it hurt a lot, the shock rod?" "Yes, every time. The physical pain was bad, but the fear was worse. Always waiting for the next punishment, never feeling safe." The officer stood. "That is why what your family accomplished here matters. You made it possible for the next generation to train without that fear." She saluted Jake with perfect military precision, then walked away. That night, Jake sat with Sophie in their hotel room. Dallas was curled up between them, snoring softly. Outside, Geneva glowed with lights from a dozen worlds, delegates still talking late into the night about everything they had discussed. "Dad," Sophie said, "do you think we really changed things?" Jake thought about that question carefully. "We started something. Whether it becomes real change depends on what happens next. Some species will embrace the new standards, others will resist, but we opened a door. We showed people a different way. That's all anyone can do." "What about Dallas? Will people remember him?" Jake smiled. "Sophie, 100 years from now, cadets across the Confederation will hear stories about the honey badger that tore through steel to save a child. Some will think it's a legend, an exaggeration, but every cadet will know it's true because it changed their entire military culture. Dallas is going to be famous for a very long time." Dallas woke up, yawned to show all his teeth, and promptly went back to sleep. Fame meant nothing to a honey badger. All that mattered was food, digging holes, and protecting the small human who loved him. 3 months later, the first results came in. 5 Confederation academies had implemented the new training standards ahead of schedule. Cadet retention rates were up. Injury rates were down, and reports from field commanders noted that recent graduates were showing improved adaptability and decision-making skills. Not everyone was happy. Some traditionalists complained that the new methods were producing weak soldiers, but the data did not support their claims. The new cadets performed as well or better than previous generations in every measurable category. The military faced the biggest transformation. Dozens of instructors resigned rather than change their methods. They were replaced by younger officers, many of them former cadets who had suffered under the old system and were determined to do better. Lieutenant Vex became the youngest training instructor in history, appointed to help redesign their entire curriculum. Earth's role in the Confederation shifted. Humanity was no longer the weakest member trying to prove themselves worthy. They became known as innovators, as the species that had the courage to question traditions that everyone else accepted without examination. Ambassador Lisa Hayes leveraged this new reputation brilliantly. Earth gained seats on key Confederation committees. Human methods in diplomacy, trade negotiations, and conflict resolution were studied and adopted by other species. What had started with a trial about a honey badger became a foundation for Earth's rise to prominence. Jake received a promotion to full commander and was assigned to head Earth's military liaison office for the entire Confederation. It was a position that had not existed before, created specifically because humanity had proven their value as bridge builders between different military traditions. Sophie returned to a normal school on Earth, but her experience had changed her. She started a program pairing children with anxiety disorders with rescue animals, inspired by her bond with Dallas. The program expanded across 6 countries within a year. And Dallas, the small, fierce animal at the center of it all, lived his best life. He dug holes in Jake's backyard, destroyed several pieces of furniture, and scared off a would-be burglar with such ferocity that the man turned himself in to police rather than risk encountering the demon beast again. 5 years after the summit, Jake stood in a newly built training facility on itself. He had been invited to observe the graduation of the first class trained entirely under the new methods. The ceremony was nothing like what Instructor would have recognized. The graduates stood tall, confident, without fear. Their instructors praised them not for enduring pain, but for demonstrating competence, courage, and the ability to think under pressure. When the shock rods were ceremonially destroyed as part of the graduation ritual, the entire class cheered. Lieutenant Vex, now Captain Vex, stood beside Jake. "Do you remember what I said on Prime, that I did not understand how emotions could make someone stronger?" "I remember," Jake said. "I understand now. Fear made me small, made me focus only on avoiding pain. But trust, loyalty, the desire to protect those I care about, these things made me larger than I believed possible." Vex looked out at the graduating cadets. "We are building better warriors now, not despite emotions, but because of them." That evening, Jake called Sophie on Earth. She appeared on the video screen with Dallas draped across her shoulders like a furry scarf, the honey badger's favorite position when he wanted attention. "How did it go?" Sophie asked. "It was perfect," Jake said. "You should see this place, Sophie. No shock rods, no fear, just excellence built on trust." "Dallas says you're welcome," Sophie said, scratching the honey badger behind his ears. Dallas made a pleased rumbling sound. "Tell Dallas that he is a very good boy who changed the galaxy." "He knows," Sophie said, grinning. "But he says you can tell him yourself when you get home, and bring treats. He's very clear on the treats part." Jake laughed. After everything they had been through, everything they had accomplished, Dallas's priorities remained wonderfully simple. Treats, affection, and the eternal mission of protecting his human from all threats, real or imagined. As Jake ended the call, he looked out at night sky. Different constellations than Earth, but the same stars that connected all Confederation worlds. Somewhere out there, on dozens of planets, cadets were training under methods that treated them as beings worthy of respect rather than subjects to be broken. It had started with a moment of instinct, a honey badger seeing danger and responding the only way nature had taught him. But that moment had sparked conversations that revealed truths people had been afraid to speak. It had challenged assumptions that had stood for generations. It had proven that sometimes the smallest, fiercest acts of courage could reshape entire civilizations. Jake thought about all the cadets who would never feel a shock rod, all the young warriors who would learn to trust their judgment instead of just following orders in fear. He thought about the ripples still spreading from that day on Prime, changes that would continue long after he was gone. And he thought about Dallas, probably sleeping now in Sophie's room, completely unconcerned with his legacy. The honey badger had done what came naturally. Humans were the ones who had recognized the meaning in that action and chosen to build something better from it. Sometimes heroes wore uniforms and medals. Sometimes they made speeches and signed treaties. And sometimes, just sometimes, they were 30 pounds of attitude and fur who loved a little girl enough to tear through steel to keep her safe. The galaxy was better for all of them, but it was better because people had chosen to learn from what Dallas had shown them. That protection mattered more than domination. That loyalty was strength. that the fiercest warriors were not those who inflicted the most pain, but those who endured anything to defend what they loved. Jake smiled and headed back to his quarters. Tomorrow he would tour more facilities, meet with more officers eager to learn human training methods. The work continued, the changes spreading. But tonight he would rest knowing that his daughter was safe on Earth, guarded by the most unlikely hero the Confederation had ever known. A honey badger named Dallas, who had absolutely no idea he was famous and would not have cared even if he did know. Some things Jake thought were universal across all species and all worlds. Love, loyalty, and the simple truth that sometimes the smallest beings have the biggest impact. Dallas would have added one more truth to that list. That any problem, whether it was a shock rod-wielding instructor or a reinforced steel container, could be solved with enough determination and teeth. It was a very honey badger philosophy, and against all odds it had changed the galaxy. The stars came out over Prime. Tomorrow they would leave for Earth. But tonight they sat together and watched Dallas dig another hole, probably planning his next great escape. Just in case anyone forgot what honey badgers were capable of. Finally, a officer came to retrieve them. The council had reached a verdict. It was time to learn Dallas's fate. "You had to go and tear through steel," Jake muttered. "Couldn't just dig under or chew through like a normal animal." Dallas yawned, showing all his teeth, and settled his head on his paws. As far as he was concerned, he had done his job. The rest was human business. He just hoped they could get through it without incident. In his experience, hope was usually the first thing to die.